Hello folks, welcome to the Grey Area. This week we get to discuss holistic reading. I'll get to tell you how I decide what to read at what point in my life and how that has been beneficial to me and has enabled me to read a wide variety of books. I've always had a great desire, or I've always enjoyed reading, and it doesn't really matter what I'm reading. Normally I just pick up almost anything and decide to read. I like encountering new things, things that I do not know, things that I'm not a professional in, and it gives me a feeling of refreshment to see new insights in things that I did not know before. So I've always been a big fan of reading. But over time, I've had to organize my reading so that I try and spread out topics that I wish to tackle in my reading, and therefore giving me a broader view of life and the world in general. So I have broken down my reading into three major sections, which are spiritual, fictional, and non-fictional reading. Let's start with spiritual. Like I have often mentioned that I'm a born-again Christian, and in the Christian journey, the book that goes without saying that you have to kind of read regularly is the Bible. But most of us have never been able to go through the whole Bible and read it from cover to cover. Personally, I haven't been able to cover the Bible from cover to cover. But I have encountered some books that have given me great insights on some chapters in the Bible, some books in the Bible that I've never really had a look at. And it has helped me to grow spiritually. How do I decide what I want to read in the spiritual realm? Basically, there are two ways of how I decide what I'm going to read when I'm covering the broad topic of spirituality. The first way is I look at what I'm spiritually struggling with. So say, for example, I'm struggling with prayer, I will look at recommendations on books dealing with prayer. I'll talk to a couple of friends and listen to what insights they give me regarding books that they have read about prayer. The other way I get to pick books that are concerned with spirituality is through recommendations, and mostly these come from my mentor, my spiritual mentor, who kind of guides me in which books to read. One of the books that I've just recently completed reading is a book called Liturgy of the Ordinary. And this book just gets to tell you how to worship God with your everyday life. And it gives insights on how in your menial job you can find God in your menial job, how in traffic you can find ways of worshiping God. And it doesn't really mean that when you're in traffic that you get to praise and pray while in the car. Yes, that also is a form of worship. But basically, it's also about controlling road rage. I know I'm one of the people who, when stuck in traffic, I get very anxious and very worked up. But you see, God doesn't kind of dwell in that kind of scenario. And this book just gives you small insights, like, for example, are you able to be patient in traffic? And in that patience, that God appreciates your patience. Patience is a virtue, really. And being patient is being holy, or exhibits holiness. The second realm or second branch of books or genre of books that I read are the fictional books. I love fictional books. I've been reading fictional books since maybe I was 9 or 10 years old, and I just kept picking up books whenever I could. But again, I kind of found a formula or ways of deciding which books to read next, because there were times I would finish a book and I don't know which next book to pick up, and I wouldn't know where to start. But I found like three ways to decide which fictional book to read. One of the ways is a suggestion I got, I think, on Instagram. One of the bookstagrammers I follow recommended that I can decide which fictional book based on the continents of origin or countries of origin. And so later, in the later half of this year, which has just begun, I intend to take a worldwide tour through books. Well, thank God for COVID-19, I kind of have to take that worldwide tour through books. So I'm kind of collecting suggestions and recommendations about books that I will read, representing every continent. And I think from South America, I'll be picking Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Love in the Time of Cholera, which again is an apt read at this point when we are looking at the COVID-19 pandemic. And then perhaps I'll be looking for more suggestions regarding, or rather from each continent, from the United States of America, Africa, Europe, Middle East, Asia, Australia, and so on. So that's one way you can decide which fictional book to read. The other way is to decide which books to read based on time periods. And the time periods, basically, you can look at them you can decide I'm only reading the books that were written in 2020 or 2019 or 2017 and so on and so forth. Or you can look at the time periods in the sense of we have the classics versus now the conventional books. And you can decide to divide your year into two halves and decide that the first half I'll be looking at the classics, and the second half I'll be looking at the conventional books. The third way of deciding which fictional book to read is you can look at them in terms of subject matter, or you can have a thematic approach in the fictional books that you're reading. So there are very many broad themes along which books are written. Most of the time, a fictional book will have like 4 or 5 themes in it, but there's normally one overriding theme or one central theme for most books. And one of the things that I've found helpful is, for example, I know a lot of the books that have come of late have to do with feminism. And I just recently finished reading a book that I should have read years ago to do with feminism, and that's 1,000 Splendid Suns. 1,000 Splendid Suns is a book written by Khalid Hosseini, a magnificent author, really, if there ever was one. And the way he narrates the story about feminism in Afghanistan is very beautiful. He tells it or sells the story in a very simple manner. The language is simple and beautiful, but not mediocre, if I may say so. You can look at themes around racism. At this point, also, I know there are quite a number of people who are looking at racism and the effects of racism. So you can decide to look at books, and there are many books which have been written regarding racism and slavery and themes and subject matters around that. So those are 3 ways. You can look at time periods. You can decide to look at books in terms of places of origin, or what I would call continental. And then thirdly, you can look at fictional books in terms of the themes that they represent. Finally, the last genre is the non-fictional books. Under the non-fictional books, again, there are very many categories. When you're looking at the non-fictional books, the ones that I often read are books to do with business, books to do with marriage, books to do with productivity, books to do, and then finally biographies and autobiographies. And in the recent past, I've been looking at some of these books, and I've been trying to kind of spread myself through this, spread myself through these 4 categories. And I've found it very enlightening. I've found myself growing in almost every aspect. I love biographies and autobiographies because I like to hear other people's stories, their challenges, and how did they weather those storms of their challenges. There are very many books which have been written to do with productivity and basically how to be well organized, how to think. One of the books that I just read recently to do with productivity is a book called Make It Stick. And Make It Stick is looking at study techniques. If study techniques and teaching techniques that have proven to be beneficial to students, and also study and teaching techniques which have been used for a very long time and yet have absolutely no value, or have been shown to have little or no value to students. So that is one book that I've read under the category of productivity. Books to do with marriage, I'm currently reading a book called His Needs, Her Needs, and basically it's trying to break down marriages to two ways. You can look at it in two ways, marriage in two ways, his needs and her needs. And you find that often in marriage you might be addressing a need, but unfortunately what you think or perceive would be a need for your partner is not necessarily a need for them. So this book just helps you to be alert or conscious of those needs and how to address those needs. And then finally, in businessman, there are too many books written about business. There's just so many of them out there to do with businesses and how to flourish in business. The list is endless, really, and I'm sure that if you just simply Google books to do with business, then you will discover how many there are. Currently, I'm reading a book called The Art of Possibility. And basically just looks at the philosophy behind successful business people, and what you and I would routinely consider barriers. The book really just breaks down how people who are successful in businesses and other realms of life see those barriers as business opportunities. I forgot to mention that in the biographies and autobiographies section, I'm currently reading a book by Walter Isaacson, Leonardo da Vinci, and he gives great detail about this gentleman who was an artist and a scientist. And I'm just breaking that down, or rather just diving into it slowly by slowly and taking bits of wisdom here and there as I go on. I will share with you my current reads, the books that I'm currently reading. So these are the hard copies that I currently have, that I'm currently reading. The rest of the books, I have them on my Kindle, and I've mentioned some of those titles of the books I'm reading. I'm yet to dive into this book. This book is The Magic Strings of Frankie Presto. This was given to me as a gift from a dear friend of mine. I love friends who give me books. And she gave me this book together with This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay, a story about a young doctor's journey in the UK and experience with the medical practice. I'm also currently reading this under the business category, the 4-hour work week by Timothy Ferris or Tim Ferris. This was a recommendation from a YouTube blogger I follow or I watch called Ali Abdal. So yes, I'm currently taking that down. This is a book called Against All Odds, and it's an autobiography that was a gift to me from the author of the book, a gentleman called Kalonzo Musyoka, who was a former vice president in Kenya. And this is a guy who came from humble beginnings and rose to the second most highest job in the land of Kenya. So I'm just kind of taking it in and understanding what are his guiding principles and his philosophy and how he weathered the storm to get to where he did. And then this was a recommendation from Oprah's book club, Ta-Nehisi Codes, The Water Dancer. I am yet to start this, but I should be starting this in a week or two. Actually, in a week I should be starting this book, and I'm hearing all good things about this book, so I can't wait to dive into it. I had already mentioned this book, Leonardo da Vinci by Walter Isaacson. It's a very big book, like you can see, and it has a lot of detail in it. Very many characters in it, very many angles in it, but the carrying principle of what I really love about it is the fact that there seems to be a confluence between science and the liberal arts. And something that Walter Isaacson is currently really pushing as, or has been pushing as a subject matter in his books. I read his autobiography, or rather his biography of Steve Jobs, and that book is amazing. And Steve Jobs says that there are beautiful things that happen when the liberal arts and the sciences are put together. That's where the innovation and that's where inventions come from. And most often, those innovations and inventions are not only useful, but they are also very practical. So yes, that's it from me. I hope the insights I've given you, or rather this video, will be helpful to you to try and help you read through life in essence, and give you a structured way of deciding what to read and when to read it. See you in the next video, and thank you for tuning in. Ciao.